If you have been paying any kind of attention to the world today, you know that there are so many people out there that are struggling for one reason or another. And if you're listening to this podcast, or if you're like me, you likely have a lot of compassion and empathy and this strong desire to do whatever you can to help other people. And if that is you, I did put together a guide for you. It's called Medicine for the People, an herbalist guide to showing up for your community in times of need. And I give you plenty of ideas in ways that you can use your herbal skills to help people in your community and organizations to connect with that can help you along the path as well. So if you want that guide, you better believe it is linked down in the show notes, totally free, really just a way to inspire you to take your herbal skills and knowledge and step out to help people that need you here and now. So it's linked for you. Go ahead and grab it if you want it. Take care. Welcome to the Herbalist Path. If you love learning about the power of plant medicine and how to use it in your life, this show is for you. I'm Mel Butterspot, clinical herbalist, herbal educator, and your host. In each episode, you're going to hear me sharing herbal insights and knowledge from my 25 plus years of working with and learning from the plants. Plus, I'm going to share interviews with some of the most amazing herbalists, educators, farmers, and healers out there, all bringing their herbal wisdom here for you. Really, this show is all about continuing this movement to put an herbalist in every home and a healer in every community. Again. Thank you so much for listening, and welcome to the Herbalist Path. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode here on the Herbalist Path. I am honored and really excited to bring today's guest to you, Maria Noel Groves. She's been on this show before, but today we're going to talk a lot about her new book, which is Herbal Gut Health, which is absolutely a brilliant work of art. I got to kind of look over before she even had it out in print. By the way, thank you for the lovely card and sending the book to me. That was such a delight. I needed it on the day that I got that from you. But anyways, Maria is a brilliant clinical herbalist. She's an educator. She is an author of several amazing books. She is so wonderful to listen to learn from. And yeah, I'm honored to have you back on the show, Maria. So welcome and thanks for being here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me back. I love your podcast and the work you do, and I'm always honored to get a chance to chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I would love to just hear a little bit about you. Like, I tend to ask this question a lot in the beginning of a show, but I'd love to hear about your beginning journeys into the world of herbalism, especially since right before we hit record, we were talking about how your mom is a Mary Kay mom. And so I don't think of that as like necessarily being the path to herbalism. So I'd love to hear about how that all came about for you.
Sure. Well, and to be honest, my mom is many things, and Mary Kay is just one small amount, but definitely like my mom is glam, and she always looks very well put together. She puts me to shame. And but she is also a nurse. She was going to be a midwife when she got pregnant with me unexpectedly, and so I kind of thwarted those plans. But she was an OB delivery nurse and always interested in holistic stuff. So she actually was one of the people who got me into herbs indirectly, because she was attending classes, programs on lactation and midwifery and all of that for her training, and was interested in the kind of more woo-woo stuff. And Deb Soul it was a conference in Maine, and Deb Soul was there, and she was selling her book in one of the early versions of I can't remember the exact name, but it was like a herbal healing for women book. And so my mom picked that up and gave that to me. And that was my first good quality herb book. I had been in my journalism degree program in college and had started to play with the, we're going to have to pause this. I'm in do not disturb mode, but everything is suddenly dinging. which is not okay. I don't know why everything is suddenly taking when I am in do not disturb mode. Sorry.
It's okay. It's always fun looking at somebody
I
else.
assume we can edit all that out.
Yeah, totally. Of course. Easy. Nothing like a little
Sorry
piece
about
of
that.
software.
I made a
called
point to
Script.
put everything in silent and do not disturb mode, and suddenly everything is ringing. Very frustrating. All right. So hopefully it doesn't do that again. But so as I was saying, my mother bought this book by Deb Soul, and it was my first really good quality herb book that I had. And was in college getting my journalism degree and had started to get interested in herbs. I always thought they were kind of neat. My mom had a book way back when from Reader's Digest on the magic and medicine of plants that I just thought it was cool that plants had superpowers. But the first books I got were just the ones from wherever in the bookstore in the 90s. And they weren't really very good quality books. And so that was my first good one. And then from there, my interest in herbs just developed. I had a pretty stressful experience in college and developed some panic attacks and insomnia. And that was when I went to a local herb shop and was like, hey, maybe herbs can help with this. I've been reading about herbs and writing about herbs for my class articles. And so the folks there at the herb shop hooked me up with valerian and kava, pretty classic in the 90s, and they were very helpful. Of course, I did a lot of personal work too. It's usually never just about herbs, but that really catapulted me into the world of herbs. I went on to work for Natural Health Magazine and cover their herb beat and run their fact-checking department. And then from there, I realized I learned from interviewing people that you could become an herbalist. And so I left that job with the goal of studying herbalism, studied with Michael Moore, Rosemary Gladstar, Nancy Phillips, and using the American Herbalist Guild structure of education as my guide. And as time went on, here I am. Kind of amazing, actually. But it did start a little bit, at least, with my mom. And she had a little garden. Her first plant that she ever planted that was medicinal herb was lemon balm, because my cousin's name was Melissa, or is Melissa. And
Big fan of the name.
Yes.
I'm also a Melissa.
And so she brought it home just because of the name. And that became one of my very first herbs that I got to play with and make remedies with. And it still remains one of my absolute favorite medicinal herbs personally and in the clinic. It's in my teacup right now.
It's in my teacup right now, too. I love that. I really love hearing, I brought up the Mary Kay thing, but it's such a great thing to recognize that I think sometimes as people get into the world of herbalism, they're so very strongly like, no, I now hate everything that's not natural, or I hate everything that's allopathic medicine. And just hearing about your mom having that nice balance, even back in the 90s, of like, yes, I do work as a nurse. And yes, I also care about natural remedies. And yes, I love to look beautiful. And if I use my Mary Kay makeup to do that, great. I think that balance is so incredibly important to think about. So bringing that up, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's a thing that sometimes gets swept under the rug. But as you talk about lemon balm as well, I want to open up that conversation because, wow, what a powerful herb, right? And for so many reasons. You mentioned how you were dealing with anxiety and sleeplessness in college, and now you've got this excellent book on gut health. You have an excellent book on herbs for sleep health. And I just want to kind of open up the conversation as to how lemon balm might be so helpful for people and why you have it in your clinic.
Yeah. So I mostly think of lemon balm for the nervous system, and that's where I most often work with it. It's just such a lovely herb to gently calm without generally being too sedating. And so folks can often work with it in the daytime. They can work with it at night because it's still calming. And sometimes folks just need to be able to calm down in order to sleep better. But it's not too pushy and can still be really profound, particularly if it's a good quality lemon balm. So I really love like the homegrown lemon balm fresh in a really potent tincture that you DIY versus most of the store-bought ones are pretty weak compared to what you could make yourself. And both for myself and for my clients just tend to respond really, really well to that. I do also love it in teas, even though dry, it does lose some of its potency. It's still a lovely companion plant in tea blends. I often blend it with holy basil. So with any of those formats, plus there are plenty of other options, but those are the biggies that I tend to work with. It's just so nice. And there's quite a bit of research on it supporting cognition and focus. So that can be really great, particularly for the folks who want that kind of clear, focused mind, but also want to be calm at the same time. Sometimes people want to be zipped up, but probably because I am a more like stressed, anxious person by nature and also a very sensitive person, I tend to attract a lot of those clients in my practice. And they tend to be super sensitive. And if you push them too much or you do something too stimulating, they tend to find it very agitating. And some of them also don't respond well with the really strong sedatives as well as the more energizing herbs. And I find lemon balm, when it's good quality, can be so supportive in a lot of ways without pushing people too hard in one way or another. But of course, it is also a digestive herb, and I do sometimes work with it for digestion as well. It's a very mild bitter. There's a little bit of a bitterness to it. There's also an aromatic property to it, especially the fresher extracts or the fresh plants tend to be even more on that aromatic and sort of in that realm, a little bit more of a carminative. And so those are two categories of plants or actions and flavors of plants that tend to enhance digestion. But when it comes to lemon balm, it's pretty mild compared to, say, like ginger is a very strong, even potentially pushy carminative, which is fantastic for many scenarios. But lemon balm's much, much gentler than that in its carminative action. Or let's say artichoke leaf is a very strong, somewhat pushy, bitter herb. Lemon balm is so, so much more mild. So when it comes to digestion, I tend to think of it for folks who would benefit from some digestive support, but need it to be super gentle, particularly for that enhancement of digestion. And because it's a nervous system herb, and a lot of our GI complaints coincide with stress and anxiety, and the two things can feed into one another. If our digestive system's not working well, it can impact our mood in a lot of different ways. We have a whole section in the book on that. But then also when we're stressed, it tends to not translate well to good digestion. And so that group of folks who are stressed, anxious, need digestive support, but don't do well with really like strong and pushy herbs, those are the folks I tend to think of most for the lemon balm. And I did have a client years ago who was working with lemon balm tincture. And I can't remember, I think we were working with it for sleep, but then she discovered that it was really helpful for her reflux symptoms. And so she started like buying, this was back when I used to sell things to my clients. So she started buying it and like sharing it with her partner and her kids, and just, really felt like it was really helpful. And which is interesting because it's not one of my go-tos of like, this is the carminative herb for that, but it is a pretty sweet plant. And it is covered in the book, although I wouldn't say it's one of the top ones that we cover with profiles in the book.
Yeah, I resonate so much with what you had to say about lemon balm, and it's something that's been really valuable for my daughter throughout her life. And you talked about how directly connected our nervous system and our digestive function really are together. And my daughter is also a very sensitive being who was very prone to anxiety, and she would immediately tell me, if she was like kind of having an anxious moment, immediately she would tell me her tummy hurts. And I always found that so fascinating. But lemon balm is a great ally for her too. And I love that, like, while it is calming and really supportive in that realm, it's also uplifting, for people. I always love to call it nature's sunshine, and the happiness that it can kind of provoke is really nice. So I love that your mom picked it up because it's Melissa officinalis.
It's a nice plant. And I love that point that it is also like mood lifting as well, which is great because some of our stronger sedative herbs can sometimes be a bit of a downer. And lemon balm and holy basil and some of these other herbs that have a lot of duality or more than duality really to them and are very aromatic often tend to be more lifting up, which is nice. So it's such a great plant.
Such a great plant. And you briefly talked about this, like the quality of somebody's lemon balm. I have mine in a tea right now. That lemon balm was grown this summer. My leaves are mostly full as they're going into my teacup. But can we just like quickly talk about how somebody can create a really good quality lemon balm to make sure they're getting the maximum benefits from this plant?
Yeah, because it is definitely a tricky plant when it comes to quality, even sometimes when you're making it yourself, but especially in commerce, it can be a little tricky to get. So I love to grow it in the garden. I am still trying to get it established here in my new property a couple of years in. So the past few years, I've had to be more reliant on other people's plant material because for whatever reason, I just haven't gotten it to be happy here, even though it was took over like more than a whole bed in my last property, which was so lovely. But if you have really happy lemon balm, and normally it's pretty easy to grow, it likes decent quality soil with some decent drainage, but some moisture, and will tolerate fairly shady into fairly sunny, but it probably mostly prefers that the sort of mid-range of part sun or dappled sun is where it tends to be happy. And then you want to harvest it when the leaves are beautiful and aromatic. You can harvest it after it blooms, but I do find that it has lost some of its oomph flavor and it doesn't always dry quite as nicely. But when you cut it back, you get a lot more growth and it's still a valuable plant. So often I will tincture that and sometimes I'll dry it, but I usually try to use the plant material that hasn't flowered yet for drying. And so for fresh plants, super easy. You just take that plant material, pick off anything that looks, messy, and then just chop it up. And the way I make tinctures is the way I learned from Michael Moore. So just shove as much as you can humanly fit into a mason jar, like really, really shove it. It's like the opposite of pulling a rabbit out of a hat as far as like, we're going to fit all this plant into this jar and then cover it. I like to use really high proof alcohol. So I tend to work with the 95% or 190 proof organic sugarcane ethanol is what I work with. But whatever you have access to that is a pretty high proof, that's either like a grain alcohol, food grade ethanol, or a vodka usually works pretty well. But I do feel like, especially the way that I make it with a lot of plant material in the jar, there's a lot of moisture there. And it probably, one, makes a better extract, and two, has a better shelf life with those particularly high proof alcohol because of all the moisture that comes out and dilutes that in the extract. And because of the aromatics, which tend to do particularly well with a higher level of alcohol. But you could still make tinctures with lower proof, maybe a little less shoved into the jar. And so that's wonderful. Let it sit for about a month, shake it whenever you think of it, and then strain it out. And that will last for, it'll stay safe for probably a decade or more. But I do find that even as a tincture, it loses its oomph after a few years. So I like to try to generally refresh and make a new batch every 1 to 3 years for that. Whereas many other plants I'll tend to keep for a lot longer as a tincture. But lemon balm, those aromatics are pretty ephemeral. For the dried plants, I really like using an air drying method and a really good circulation of air to start them off. So you could hang them, or you can put them on a screen with a fan under. I'm in a very humid environment, so I have to be really careful that things don't get kind of ferment or mildew or anything like that over time. So I can't 100% air dry things in like the natural air of a house in this region. It's just too humid to go 100%, but starting with that gentle air drying is nice. And then once they're pretty close to dry, usually then you can pop them in a dehydrator, or I tend to use the car as a dehydrator. And so putting them in a basket with another basket over it and putting it in the windshield or on the seat if it's a warmer day, modulating where you put it, making sure it's clean and all of that wherever you're putting it, and then just letting it crisp up so it's 100% dry. But that's how I do it. If you have access to a dehydrator that you can keep at a temp that's low enough that you're not cooking it, but that you can also bump up if it's too humid and it needs to dry a little better, those can work really well. I just find that sometimes it's tricky because you fill up a dehydrator so fast.
Yeah.
Especially with a plant like lemon balm where I have so much I want to dry. So I tend to use more of the screens and the maybe a brown paper bag or a basket or pushing it up in the car personally.
I love the car tip. I've never thought of that, but I'm definitely a screens. I don't have, well, I have a dehydrator, but I never use it. I don't know. Something about it. I just like it to dry naturally. I don't know what it is. So many of my students are like,
I use mine
how
for
long do you
flowers?
Right.
Berries. That's
Right.
good.
For some calendula flowers, definitely would be nice to make sure you're getting all that calyx nice and dried up instead of not and getting moldy medicine later. But I love the tip of like lemon balm in the car. How nice that must make your car smell.
Yes, it does. But you got to be careful it doesn't get too hot or sit there too long, because otherwise we cook out all the goodness. And props to Michael Moore. That was a tip I learned from him.
Nice.
Even like, 4 miles from the Mexico border, he would, have students dry things in the car. And
wow. But nice. Yeah, I'd definitely be worried about the sun and the heat down south like that.
Yeah,
that's
they
a
dry
cool
pretty
tip.
quickly down there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I bet. Absolutely. And I just got to say, you just gave me a little bit of relief hearing that the lemon balm hasn't taken off at your new home yet, because it doesn't take off in my yard at all and garden either. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, you are a mint. You are supposed to spread like a mint. Why are you not happy? Yeah. So I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I don't know what that I'm gonna try again next year. And I think part of my thing is I really wanted to put it in the ground. And most of my gardening in the new property has been just keeping it super simple with deck planters that are self-watering, and there's limited space there. So I was like, I'll just put lemon balm in the ground. And I think it's just not happy in the ground here. It's shadier, it's different soil. It's not all like as well amended as my old property was. So I'm hoping next year I'm just going to put it in the deck planter and hope it takes off.
I'll be praying to the lemon balm gods and goddesses for you that it does take off in the way that's necessary. One thing you mentioned when you were talking about lemon balm and some of the medicinal properties that this plant has is that it has some mild bitter properties. And I wonder if you could just take some time to break down why the heck would we want something that's bitter?
Yeah. So bitters are a great category. It's one of the first, actually, I think it may be the first category of plants that I cover in the book when we start getting into the plant world. And so bitter flavors do a lot of things. And the theory is that because most of our poisonous plants are bitter, our body has a pretty strong response to bitter tastes. And that said, we're not talking about consuming toxic plants. And when we were talking about herbal bitters, which I know you know this, but just saying it for the general public, we're talking about plants that are otherwise really safe that happen to have a bitter flavor. So a classic that a lot of folks can easily start with is citrus peel from an organic citrus that has been, well treated and all that, because if you think of that pith of your citrus, that can be very bitter. And I also love working with artichoke, which is a pretty strong bitter herb that's very sustainable, easy to cultivate in some places. If you've ever seen, artichoke leaves, they're huge. So you can actually make a fair amount of medicine with a single leaf. And then, of course, we love our milder bitters like dandelion root and burdock root, and dandelion leaf is, relatively bitter as well. And quite a few more, but those are some good starting ones to just get a feeling. And of course, we have foods that are bitter like black coffee and radicchio and chicory roots and all sorts of other good stuff. So those bitter flavors, when we eat them, they increase salivation, they increase digestive juices, and they sort of turn on the whole digestive system. So peristalsis, which is that wave-like motion that moves food through from the top to the bottom, works better. The signaling of the digestive system often works better. And just generally, things mostly work better. There is a caveat, and that is that if you're doing really intense bitters solo, especially long-term, they can slow gastric emptying, throughout the rest of the body. They tend to enhance motility. But as far as the stomach emptying, its contents, it tends to slow that down a little bit. And most bitters are considered to be energetically cold. And classically, we tend to combine bitter herbs with carminatives that add a little more flavor. They also enhance digestion through other mechanisms, and they tend to be energetically more warming. And studies have even shown that in the digestive system, the carminatives are more prokinetic. They tend to move things along, including gastric emptying. And when you combine bitters and carminatives together, as a lot of the classic formulas do, you have this very nice, like, regulating effect on digestive motility. So usually things get better. So those are just a few things it does in the bitter flavor does in the digestive system. It also tends to lower blood sugar a bit. So, or at least reduce the glucose spike. And so oftentimes if folks are having their bitters right before or right with their meal, just as they're about to start eating, they'll find that the glucose impact is not quite as significant. And so they don't feel quite as much of that rise and fall, but also that it tends to be very regulatory to appetite. So I've worked with bitters in the clinic with folks who don't have a good appetite, sometimes just through, whether intentionally or unintentionally, by eating less and less, we start to get really queasy and like not appealing, food's just not very appealing. And so I've had folks do, often also in combination with the carminatives, but I'll have them eat some kind of food that's pretty like as tolerable as possible. Maybe it's a smoothie that's even sweetened a little bit. That's something that sometimes people can eat even when they're otherwise like stomach doesn't feel great. And then I'll have them take just a little bit of this bitter carminative blend at the same time. And often they'll find over time that their body's healthy digestion as well as their healthy appetite increases. So I remember a client being like, oh my goodness, I actually craved breakfast for the first time. Like, it was so wonderful. And so other folks who maybe have a problem, are concerned about overeating might be like, well, I don't want that because it's going to make me hungrier and I don't want to be hungrier. And they found the opposite to be true, that in folks who are having bitters, that they have fewer of the cravings to overeat or to eat foods that are more junk food, and instead crave healthier foods and feel satisfied more appropriately. That idea that, when you eat meat and it tastes great, then suddenly you're like, oh gosh, I'm super full. And actually, as it turns out, I was full about 20 minutes ago, but I just didn't realize it till now. And now I feel gross because I've eaten too much and I'm full. With bitters, we tend to feel that satiety sooner. And so it makes it easier to stop eating when you're actually feeling satisfied and just having a healthier relationship with food and appetite all around, which is pretty cool. I love how plants can have these dual actions, whether we're talking about motility or we're talking about appetite, that tend to bring us into the balance of where we should be. That doesn't mean that bitters are right for everybody, but they do have a lot of benefits for most people. And traditionally, we would have been consuming bitters in our daily diets, in our herbal remedies. They've very classically been put into alcohol extracts. So that's how we came up with cocktail bitters and bitter liqueurs that we have now. But a lot of those started off as medicinal blends in ancient times. And Guido Masse has a really nice book on the wild medicine solution and really dives deep into bitters. Full disclosure, he's also part owner of a company that makes digestive bitters. But he has a lot of really great info and does a lot of teaching on there and highlights some of the research that's been done. So those are just a few things about this that make
just a few things.
So awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And you brought it up towards the end there, but I was listening to you speak about how, some of those people that really need to improve their appetite and get more nourishing foods into their body can benefit with bitters. And then there are the people that may not want to increase more food and such into their bodies. And it just really made me think about the duality that plants can have and how amazing and powerful and, for lack of a better term, magical that is. And I wonder if you could just take a moment to elaborate on that in conjunction with like how important it is to know that, yes, we're talking about bitters. Yes, we've talked about how some people benefit in this way and others benefit in that way. And also, they may not be for everybody. Just herbs in general, not even just bitters.
Yeah, any one plant, any one thing rather, is not going to be right for everybody. And so we have to listen to our bodies. And when it comes to bitters, you'll often know pretty quickly whether or not it agrees with you, because you'll either start feeling better Or if you're one of those folks that bitters don't really agree with, you'll start feeling worse. And it could be the individual plant, it could be the dose, it could be the intensity. But, generally, if a bitter isn't going to agree, you might notice that you feel more nauseous with it, whereas with somebody else, they might feel less nauseous. That they might get some discomfort, maybe a worsening of reflux or some gastric discomfort. And those are not signs that the plant is right for you. Those are signs that the plant is not right for you. And my personal opinion on most of the scenarios when people find that the bitters are not agreeing with them is there may be some amount of damage, or maybe the gut lining. We're supposed to have this nice thick mucus layer that helps protect the gut lining helps protect the gut from the acid that's naturally produced in the stomach. And if that lining is thinner, or if the gut is inflamed, or if there's irritation of some sort, sometimes stimulating digestion, stimulating digestive juices in those people just makes it feel worse. It's like literally rubbing acid into a wound. Most cases of reflux often get better with bitters because it improves signaling and helps that sphincter above the stomach shut. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the reflux gets worse. And if that's the case, then bitters aren't the right herb for you. I know Thomas Easley, who I've taken a few classes with over the years, he talks about if your tongue is withered, we think of the tongue as a window into how the rest of the body and even potentially the digestive system, that when you have a tongue that's withered and dry, that may indicate that your digestive system is, kind of lacking in its quality and integrity. And so working on the gut healing and the gut soothing herbs first, and also figuring out what's causing the problem and addressing that as well, will probably be the top goals. But if bitters aren't the right plant, most often people are going to feel not great with it. Also, having it with food, especially those stronger bitters, is usually going to agree better because that's when they work their magic. And if we're not eating food and you suddenly have a really strong bitter, it could lower your blood sugar, it could kick up your digestive juices when there's no food to break down. And that can make us not feel so great. So usually we're best off having the bitter at the beginning of the meal is best, or just before, or maybe towards the end for some people, but right around food time and usually earlier is better.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. You started to talk about a lot of the gut lining and how we have the mucus to protect us there, and how all of these various signs of inflammation may be happening in the digestive system. And I'm curious if you could just talk about some of the things that a common person might be able to say, oh, maybe there's inflammation happening in my gut, and why it matters that we take care of the gut. Because I know you also have this brilliant book, Body in Balance, and you've got this herbal gut health. And yeah, I'd love to kind of bring that all together for folks.
Yeah. And I should state along with that, for the record, that if you're having digestive issues, it's a good idea to talk about it with your doctor. Let them know. It may be appropriate to go to a gastroenterologist and just check things out, make sure everything's okay. Certainly in a lot of cases, folks get the answer of, there's not much that we see, or there's nothing we see, and take this proton pump inhibitor, and that's all you get for an answer, which is kind of a bummer because that usually doesn't have a whole lot of long-term solution. But sometimes there really is something that needs to be addressed, and there are ways to address that. And so it's good to just, and one of the things I did focus a lot on in herbal gut health is when to call a doctor, or signs of things, and all of that, because a lot of the scenarios we talk about could be just mild day-to-day stuff that's no big deal, really easy to just sort of self-care for.
Yeah.
And then other times it could be something really serious, and maybe herbs are totally fine as part of your protocol, but there may be an urgent need or a significant need for conventional care. So just kind of putting that out there just to be, because
super important.
As I'm sure you know from working with the public, sometimes people will come to you with these, stories, and you're like, oh my gosh, I should probably go see the doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is probably not the time to brew a cup of dandelion or marshmallow tea.
Yeah.
The time to get checked out. So just saying that for the record, but kind of going back to your question. So you were talking, and I want to make sure that I'm back on track here. So
Sure.
you were asking more about, just
what kind of signs or symptoms might somebody start to see that may want to give them that red flag or that light bulb going off like, hey, something is not right here. I should go visit with a doctor and or figure out what I need to do to make it better, right? And yes, we'll start there.
Yeah. So especially when it comes to scenarios that might warrant gut soothing and gut healing types of remedies, I would see some of the signs as being, like a lot of discomfort, and especially discomfort that feels like burning, or, we can have reflux, and reflux can be caused by many different things, but reflux is one thing, but also, burning further down, like maybe in the stomach. If you're consuming foods that are more flavorful, the bitters, the carminatives, the pungents, those kinds of flavors, and they're really causing a lot of irritation, that's usually a sign. Oftentimes people won't tolerate alcohol-based things either, whether it's consuming alcohol, which of course isn't really great for the gut anyway, but even alcohol-based tinctures, they might be like, oh, that really burns when I take that. I've diluted it in some water and it still really burns. Those might be signs to me that their gut lining has lost some of its quality and integrity. And I'm not a doctor, so I can't really diagnose or prescribe or any of that. But those might be some of the patterns I'd be wondering about. And so I might think about working with the more soothing and healing, like kind of the wound healing herbs that are safe to consume. But I may also say it's a good idea just to get checked out, make sure everything's okay, maybe an endoscopy, that kind of thing. There are lots of other scenarios that can warrant getting things checked. So a biggie is if you suddenly can't have a bowel movement, that could be a sign of a bowel obstruction. Usually it's accompanied by things like vomiting and intense pain, and possibly also the inability to pass gas. And so that's like a medical emergency.
That's doctor.
That's not just doctor. That's go to the ER ASAP. That's a medical emergency. If folks are just really becoming very malnourished, especially in spite of eating healthy foods and all of that, there's probably some kind of damage or malabsorption issue, like maybe Crohn's disease, and they may need steroid medications or surgery or something like that. If ulcers are a scenario that herbs can be supportive for, but they also may require conventional medical care. And that's one of the scenarios where a proton pump inhibitor can actually be very valuable, because shutting down the stomach acid so that you're not perpetuating the damage and giving your body a chance to heal could actually be very appropriate. And that's something somebody would work with their practitioner. I had a relative who had to go to the ER because it bled so much from ulcers that was passed out. And that was a case for going to the hospital. Really weird bowel changes. I mean, the bowel movements can shift around a lot based off of like what's going on in your life, your nervous system, what you're eating. So I don't want people to become paranoid. But if you've always been a certain way and then suddenly your bowels just shift kind of dramatically, then that would be a good cause to at least just make an appointment for a checkup. If you're of the age of getting a colonoscopy, maybe getting a colonoscopy. There are a lot of reasons why bowel movements might change, and some of them are no big deal, and just, a little natural care is fine. And some things might require some conventional care. Blood, bleeding a lot, could just be a hemorrhoid, but, it could be something more serious. So those are just a few examples of scenarios that you'd want to be careful. And even with reflux, it's super common. And I don't love proton pump inhibitors long-term because they shut down stomach acid so much that you can end up with nutrient deficiencies, and your immune system tends to not function as well without stomach acid to kill off germs. But we don't want to ignore it either. And so just allowing reflux to occur over and over and over again, anytime we're damaging tissue repeatedly, there's a risk of impairing its function, but also leading to some form of cancer. So we have a friend who ended up dying, unfortunately, because he was having a lot of reflux. It was probably a side effect of some medications he was on after a heart attack, and the doctor just was paying more attention to the big picture and not that symptom. And he ended up with esophageal cancer, and that was what ended up killing him. So, so it is important to take care of these things. And, holistically, maybe I would have loved to have seen if he was my client, I would have loved to have seen if there was a way that we could support to reduce and get rid of the reflux through natural methods. But proton pump inhibitors absolutely would have been a better option than nothing at all in that case.
Yeah.
Could have saved his life.
That's unfortunate to watch that happen and, you know, be able to think about things in hindsight. Really unfortunate.
For the family, for sure.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you iterating the importance of working with appropriate medical people, right? It's not just about the natural remedies, which is so incredibly important to mention to people. Like I mentioned earlier, so many people are like, oh, I've discovered natural remedies, and so now I'll never go to the doctor. I'm like, whoa. I had just seen somebody post on that yesterday. They're like, oh, if you're using natural remedies, you shouldn't need to go to the doctor. And I'm like, whoa, red flag. Like, not okay to be sharing that kind of information. Anyways.
As somebody who was raised by a nurse, and my grandmother is a nurse, and several of my family members work in the medical profession, I have deep respect for what they do.
Absolutely.
And there are some things, you know, the natural and herbal folks are better at. And then there are some things that the conventional care folks are at. And what a great world we live in, that we have the option of, you know, both and, which is pretty nice. So just, you know, whatever in, you know, our allies and toolkit helps.
Absolutely.
Is great.
Absolutely. 100% agree on that. So let's talk more about the herbs though. And we've discovered that this isn't something extremely serious, right? So what can we do if we are feeling some of that discomfort in our gut or digestive system? What are some of the first steps to start thinking about if we want to do the work on ourselves to help heal and repair any kind of damage or inflammation happening in the gut?
Yeah, I will tend to kind of key in, and I would be starting to ask some questions and or observe, you know, when you're asking yourself these questions. So questions would be like, where is the discomfort? What does the discomfort feel like? Is it more of a gas, bloating, spasm kind of discomfort? Or is it more like a burning, there's a wound and something's like really not feeling good on it? Those are two different scenarios, at least two different scenarios, and different sets of herbs and approaches and potential underlying causes. When do you feel it in relationship to when you've eaten? Is it when it's on an empty stomach? Is it as soon as you started eating? Is it a couple hours later? You know, things take a while to go through the digestive system. So that might be indicative of, you know, kind of where things are going on. What makes it better and what makes it worse? Like that can be really enlightening for us. And so I would be looking at things like, are the bitters and the carminatives and the strong flavors, the sour things, did those make it better or worse? And if those make it better, especially something like, say, reflux, that suggests to me that possibly, and I can't diagnose, I'm not a doctor, but that would suggest to me that possibly we're dealing with more of a sluggish digestion issue where enhancing digestion is potentially going to help the scenario because you feel better once that happens. If it feels worse, then I might be wondering, you know, and I've ruled out that it wasn't just the dose or disagreement with that particular herb. I might be wondering, okay, yeah, bitters and ginger and vinegar, and those things are, you know, making this discomfort, this burning feeling worse. So therefore, I might be thinking more on those soothing and healing and mucilaginous wound healing type plants instead to kind of do that other, you know, instead of enhancing digestion, we're healing the gut. And not that you can't do them both, but in more extreme states, you're usually going to be focused more on one or another at that period of time. So those would be some questions. On the other hand, if I have a client and they say, oh, my reflux is really bad when I eat sugar or bread or apples or beans or cruciferous vegetable, you know, not just that cruciferous vegetables give them gas, but that it bothers their reflux, that it's kind of coming up. I would be very suspicious of dysbiosis, like bad bacteria that are not quite in harmony and probably have crept further up the digestive tract into the small intestine. And again, I can't diagnose, but I might suggest that they go get a test for SIBO and see if that's one of their underlying concerns. And I might be considering if they're not in too damaged of a state yet, sometimes enhancing digestion helps. If they are doing okay, if they are feeling some damage, then it's usually a trickier thing, because sometimes those mucilaginous herbs like marshmallow and slippery elm, because they're full of complex starches that ferment easily with certain bacteria, they may feel worse with those. Sometimes marshmallow leaf is better tolerated. But I tend to have to be a little bit choosier about my gut healing herbs. In that scenario, I might be working with marshmallow leaf, maybe some meadowsweet, which is also nice for reducing inflammation, maybe some plantain. I love plantain leaf in teas. It's not always the best tasting, but that can be a really great, basic blend that doesn't tend to aggravate the dysbiosis. There might be a need for antimicrobials, and just depending on what's going on, sometimes certain probiotics are helpful, whereas other ones might make it worse. So, so those are just a few things that I might be thinking of for sleuthing out. And I do have a section towards the back of the book that talks about different patterns. So there's a chart in the heartburn section that talks about patterns that really apply to a lot more than just heartburn. But then towards the back in the appendix, there are just kind of those questions to be asking, to be thinking, like, what's going on? When, is it that I'm not digesting a food? Is it that you're sensitive to a food? Is it that there's something else going on in the digestive tract itself?
Yeah, I love that you put so many of those questions in, because as herbalists, I feel like our job is we're detectives, right? You've got to ask all of the questions. And I guess that makes it really great sense for you as a journalist as well. So many questions to ask about what's going on in the body. And yeah, exactly. What's really happening here? And how can I find the right herb to pair with this person at this time is so incredibly important. So you started talking a little bit about some of the more cooling or mucilaginous kind of coating herbs. And I wonder if you could just share a little bit more about some of those that can be more supportive for people.
Yeah, I love those categories of herbs. For myself personally, they're definitely among my favorite ones, since I can tend towards a sour stomach pretty easily. And so marshmallow is one of my absolute favorites. It's just such a sustainable plant. You can work with the roots, you can work with the leaves. I particularly really love working with the roots, but the leaves are also really nice. And if folks do have that dysbiosis, as I mentioned before, oftentimes they'll tolerate the leaves better. Plus, the leaves are easier to harvest on your own in large quantities, and they're cheaper, and they last longer and all that, because they're just so fluffy.
So soft and fuzzy and pretty.
I love marshmallow. That's one of my favorites. Slippery elm is somewhat similar. The bark of slippery elm, the inner bark, to marshmallow root. There are some sustainability concerns with that one, so I don't personally work with it as much as I used to in my early days, just since marshmallow does almost the same stuff. Also, they both taste good. Marshmallow's got a little bit more of like an oaty flavor to like oatmeal to the roots, whereas slippery elm has a little bit of a maple like flavor, which is kind of nice, and it is a little bit slimier than the marshmallow root is. And so those are classic ones, but aloe inner gel is one. I don't tend to work with that one as often, just because I find it hard to find a reliable, good quality source without additives of just the inner gel. You could find the whole leaf preparations a lot more easily, but the inner latex is a bit toxic, pretty seriously laxative, and very, very, very bitter. And so for the soothing healing, I don't want the whole leaf. I want just that like inner gel that's really clear. I know that some of the herbalists who live in more warm, arid climates love working with the prickly pear cactus pads that has very similar properties. And, you got to peel off the outer stuff and all the little prickly things, but you don't have to deal with that latex that's bitter and laxative like you do with the aloe. But it's harder to get commercially good quality, in my opinion. And then, but that's a good one. You've also got linden leaf. I've started to really fall in love with over the last few years. It's a gentle nervine. We think of it most often for the heart and for the nervous system, but and calming as a nervine. But it is also mucilaginous, and it has a little bit of a sweet honey cherry-like flavor to it. So I love adding that one to teas as well. I might do that, or marshmallow, or both, and then add some other herbs to it. So those are probably some of my biggies. I'm sure there are more. In a pinch, like oat milk and
Yeah.
oatmeal have
Right.
benefits. Do you have any favorites? Is there anything that I missed there?
You've mentioned a lot that I love. I also, not that it's super mucilaginous, but just for that healing repair kind of vulnerary work, I really love calendula and plantain are two of my favorites in that department. And plantain's got a bit of the mucilaginous, but not quite as much as when we're going to get in marshmallow or linden. Linden and I have just a really lovely relationship. You can say it, and I'm like, oh, thank you for the hug, just for saying the name. It's tree branches wrapping around me.
Also in my teacup right now.
Yeah, I had it in my teacup last night. I decided not yet today, but love that plant so much. Yeah, so those are some of my favorites that I'll go to. Marshmallow is high on the list. Meadowsweet, absolutely wonderful in so many of those situations. So yeah. And it's great when you're talking with a fellow herbalist and they talk about a different herb and you're like, I love that too so much. Your heart just.
And sometimes it's the opposite where you hear somebody talk about a plant and you're like, oh, wow, I never worked with that one, but I'll have to keep that one in mind. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you also for bringing up the aloe piece and the differentiation between the leaf and that little clear, slimy, super mucilaginous inner gel. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. They hear aloe and they're like, great, that's the one. And I'm like, please don't. You can really cause some problems for yourself if you're taking it hoping to ease inflammation. And then you're like, oh, and suddenly I am just on the toilet for the rest of the day. So that's unfortunate. When it comes to taking these kind of more soothing herbs for easing that heat and inflammation and maybe doing some repair work in the digestive system, what's the best way people might want to think about bringing that into their bodies, or some of the best ways?
Well, one of my favorites is tea. So I think that might be where you're steering me towards. So yeah, tea is definitely, and most of the recipes, not all, but most of the recipes in the book are teas because one, when you're working with the mucilaginous herbs, they extract way better in water-based extracts than in other solvents. So that's a biggie right there. But then, generally water is fantastic solvent for most of the constituents we're talking about. And then it's also just this very soothing, non-irritating. I mean, if you've got a lot of gut irritation and you're doing lots of tinctures, that alcohol, even in a tincture dose, can sometimes be pretty irritating. For most people, totally fine. But in that case, it can be irritating. Vinegar, if somebody's already got a sour, irritated digestive system, it's fine if you're just stimulating digestion. But in somebody who needs more gut healing and gut soothing, it's usually not a great solvent. So tea is great. You can also do broths. You can make gruels like oatmeal or some other kind of oatmeal-like food and then add powdered herbs to that. You can do pills. But the problem with pills is that your body has to then break them down. And then you also don't get their direct contact with the upper part, the esophagus, the mouth. Hopefully they'll hit the stomach at least when they break down. So that's kind of a downside. But with tea, especially if you make a big pot of tea and you just kind of sip it throughout the day, you're constantly applying that herb material in a very bioavailable format directly to the digestive system from like the mouth all the way down. Yeah, eventually like the body breaks it down enough so it's not making direct contact with your lower GI, but it's still impacting it in a positive way. So that's my favorite. But there are plenty of other ways you can make the little powder balls with honey and things, or glycerin if you don't want to do honey, and suck on lozenges. And in a pinch, sometimes you can take pills. But yeah, those are my favorite. But tea is the big one. Especially I like doing a longer infusion.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of my herbs sit in my cup all day. And then I'll get more hot water and maybe add a little bit of more of an herb to freshen it up. So thank you so much for that. We've talked a lot about the digestive system. Your book is a brilliant work of art. Like, it's, in my eyes, darn near everything that a person needs to know to help with their entire gut health, right? But when we talk about the gut, can you just quickly, I love in the beginning how you really explain the different organs and parts of the gut or the digestive system as a whole. So can you just as quickly, or it doesn't have to be quickly, but just break that down. What are the parts of the digestive system when we're thinking about, oh, we have work to do there? Who do we need to work on?
For sure. And also huge props to the publishers. They had 3 different artists, illustrators who worked on the book, editors, designers, all that. So thanks to the team that helped make the book what it is, in addition to my words. But so as far as the parts of the digestive system, I tend to think of it kind of loosely as the upper GI and then the lower GI, which is outside of most of the camera lens here. And so the upper GI is really focused on mechanically, with actual like churning and chomping and all that, breaking things down. And then chemically, all the different digestive juices in the stomach and produced by the pancreas and the saliva in the mouth, just breaking things down. So the main goal of that upper GI is just like smash that food to bits so we can get it in little tiny particles that the body can then absorb and turn into other things. So we've got, our mouth, our senses, our sense of smell plays a role in our digestive system and our experience of the food. We've got our mouth, the moisture of our mouth, the juices that come out of our mouth, the chewing of our teeth, the taste on our taste buds that all tell the body, this is what's coming down the pike. Here are the things you want to make to help break it down, all really helpful. And then we have our esophagus, which is pretty much just the tube that it then goes down the chute into the stomach. And then on either side of the stomach, we have these sphincters that close. I like to think of it as a carnival ride that you're going on that's going to be tilting, whirling, or spinning or something like that. And we need to make sure the doors are shut so that everything stays in. Plus, the acid that's produced by the stomach, there are various digestive juices that are produced in the stomach. One of the biggies is hydrochloric acid, and it's really, really strong. It can burn a hole through the floor. It's really strong. The rest of the body is not designed to handle hydrochloric acid. The stomach should have this really thick mucus lining that helps protect it from that. And so that's why, when that gets thin or there are, wounds that appear on it, that's when we run into problems with burning and sensations in the gut sometimes. And then also in the stomach, we have all these muscles that they churn a lot. So their action is really just very much, moving that food around physically along with all the acid. The food then comes out of the stomach as this liquidy substance called, I can never remember if it's chyme or chyme.
I've heard chyme, but it is spelled like chyme.
I think it's chyme. I say how to pronounce it in the book, but I always forget it in real life. But anyway, so it comes out of the body and this liquidy substance. And then at that point, we're kind of at the very end of the upper GI, right about there, and that upper stretch of that small intestine. And right by there, we have the liver that's been detoxifying the blood and pulling that out in the form of bile. And if you have a gallbladder, it's stored there in the gallbladder. And then ideally, as the food is coming out of the stomach, the body's like, oh, time to take out the trash, and splurks out that, splurk is a Michael Moore word that I really love, splurks that bile out. And the bile, it's how to get the waste out. But in the meantime, it helps break down fats and aids digestion as well. And then along with that, on that same common bile duct, we have the pancreas that should be producing digestive enzymes. And we make digestive enzymes in a lot of different places, but the majority of them are produced there. And so those come down the pike and just mix in with all this. And then we begin even more of the chemical breakdown. And then from there, we go through the small intestine, just like this. We're in more of the lower GI that's mostly focused on absorbing all of these things that have been broken down to bits and bits and bits. So it's going to move around the tube of the intestines. The intestines have this like lining that's almost like a shag carpet, these villi and microvilli to really enhance the surface area. I've got more specific statistics in the book, but I don't remember them. But really enhance the surface areas like football fields or something like that. Yeah, so that we have absorption. And I think of it as like going down a conveyor belt, and the body is like, oh, we'll take you and we're going to take you, and absorbing those nutrients, and then moves further down into the large intestine. The large intestine has muscles that do more of a wringing motion. So if you think of like a sopping wet towel and how you wring it to dry it out a little bit. So, by the time we get to the large intestine, there's still a little bit to absorb, but most of the absorption has taken place. And now we're just prepping whatever's left as waste to get it out of the body. So we'll wring out most of the fluid, make things hopefully semi-solid again in the form of feces. A lot of the microbiota that we have in our body are in the large and in the colon and in the large intestine. And so they do their work of chewing up fibers and doing all the good stuff. And we have them kind of like the enzymes. They occur in various places, but they're particularly prolific in that area of the gut. And so they do a little bit more magic. And then eventually things come out of our body as species. And peristalsis is what moves that through all the way down. Pretty neat. Usually takes, in an ideal scenario, we're talking about like a day and a half, 2, maybe 3 days that food lasts. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little longer, but it's a pretty wild and crazy, like Richard Scarry, story of how everything moves through and what happens along the way.
I loved your story. Like you really did a great job of painting the picture of the journey of a morsel of food through the body. So thank you for that. I think it's important because sometimes people just think, oh, the gut. Some people might just think the stomach, or they'll bring in the intestines to it. But it is a really whole big journey happening from before you even eat the food, right? With the smell. So thank you for that. I think that is so important. And I wonder, we can cover so much, but obviously people can learn so much more through your book, and they should definitely go and get your book. But if you had some last words of wisdom for people that are like, hey, I do want to use herbs and I want to support myself and my gut throughout the rest of whatever it may be for them, what kind of words would you share?
Yeah, I would listen to your body. I would, start playing with some of the really safe and gentle herbs. There are lots of products out there on the market made by really great companies, and then see how your body feels when you have them and listen to your body. And that will tell you, because, you can work with some of these things when there's something overtly going on, but also they can just be taken, just digestive bitters, carminatives, gut supportive herbs. They can be just part of the daily routine to support gut health. And of course, we want to do all the other bigger stuff, like work on our nervous system and our mind-body balance and eat a healthy diet and move our bodies and take breaks between meals. And, there are a lot of other ways we can support our digestive system beyond simply taking herbs. But a lot of our classic digestive herbs are very accessible. We're talking like dandelion root tea or ginger root in food or tea, or chewing on a few fennel seeds, or, just like a lot of really easy, accessible ways to work with the plants, and then listen to your body and see how it responds.
Yeah, that listen to your body piece is so important because it really goes back to what we were talking about earlier, how not every herb is going to be right for you. And I think sometimes people hear a glorified herb out on social media or wherever they've gotten their information are like, no, this has to work for me. And like, really, it's not. And your body's trying to give you all these red flags like, hey, that's not it. That's not it. So our bodies are very intelligent. And yeah, learning that art of listening to them is so important. And yes, of course, all of the other things with moving your body and taking care of the nervous system and finding that life balance and eating well. So incredibly important. So thank you, Maria. You are such a wealth of knowledge. It's always a great pleasure to get to listen to you and learn from you on this show. I'm really excited to have you come and talk about perimenopause and menopause and ways we can use herbs to support on that journey inside of the Community Herbalist certification and mentorship. And for anybody else out there that wants to learn more from Maria, number one, obviously go and get her books. Like, they are beautiful. They are brilliant. They are really, really well written, far superior to many of the AI written books out there. So I will definitely be sure to link to her books here. Also, Maria does quite a lot of online herbal training as well through Wintergreen Botanicals. I would imagine you might have openings if people want to work with you one-on-one. But yeah, tell us more about how people can learn more with you, work with you, or anything along those lines.
Our website is a pretty good clearinghouse for information. So that's wintergreenbotanicals.com, and you can get books directly through me, but you can also feel free to get them elsewhere. And then my classes are usually listed on there, and consultation information. And I'm taking a little bit of a break while I work on the next edit round for book number 5. And I'm taking a break from books for a while so that I can take care of other things. But yeah, so I do all those things are available on my website. You can also sign up for my mailing list via my website and some of the other social media channels. I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. My personal Facebook page, I keep for personal stuff, but I have a business page on Facebook and post the herbal stuff there. I have a YouTube page, which is most of my stuff on YouTube is private for my students, but I do keep a handful of free things. And if I do videos that end up, from other blogs and podcasts, I'll post them on a playlist there too. So you can catch a lot of free stuff on my YouTube page. And I'd say those are probably the big places. The newsletter I send out about one a month. I try not to make it, too frequent. And I always try to load it. I load it up with a ton of stuff associated with the season. I always try to give some good recipes or article links or something like that, in addition to updates on what I'm up to. So those are some good ways. I do have a couple series happening this year in 2026. I'll be doing the Home Herbalist series in the summer. And then I'm working with a variety of guest teachers to do for advanced students a clinical and assessment series that's going to be happening in the fall and in the springtime. And that should be a lot of fun as well. Amazing. So those are all online. I do have a few in-person things, but those series are all live streamed and recorded.
Awesome. That is beautiful. I will definitely link to your website and to your books and all of the things in the show notes and on our website as well. And again, thank you so much for all the work that you do and the knowledge and wisdom you share with people of this world. You are a very treasured resource. Thank you.
And thank you so much for your generosity and sharing all that you share with the world. And then also in inviting people like me on to come and chit chat. So
it's so important.
Greatly appreciate it. And it's always fun to chat with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Herbalist Path. If you're loving this journey into herbal medicine, please follow and review the show. It helps more people find their own path with the plants. And if you know someone who could use this kind of support, please share this episode with them, so that way we can keep making herbalism spread like wildflowers. Also, a gentle reminder, nothing shared on this podcast is intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. This is all for educational purposes, and a little entertainment too. But it is not a substitute for personalized care from a qualified health practitioner. Always do your own research, listen to your body, and when needed, partner with a trusted professional who honors both your intuition and your unique health journey. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep walking the herbalist path.